Many of the photos inside this until now private album were taken at their home on the coast of Maine in Kennebunkport.
His dad would put us an anchor to the windward. What he means by that is a place where our family gathers.
Walker's Point is the summer home where 100 years of Bush family history has occurred.
There's a lot of memories in this place, a lot of memories, happy memories, all of them happy.
My great-grandfather purchased that in the early 1900s. Mother and Dad love it there. He loves going there. He loves to fish. He loves the waves crashing across the rocks. He found solace and comfort there, and it's a place where his sons and daughter come to be with him.
The only summer of his life that he wasn't there was when he was in the military. I think it's therapeutic. The ocean is a powerful and majestic thing, and it's soothing for my dad.
You know, my parents have moved over almost 50 times or something like that, maybe over 50 times. So we've had a pretty transient life, but that's been our one constant. We love it. We know our second cousins once removed because of Kennebunkport.
It's a big, sprawling piece of land. It carries a huge amount of family history in it, but it is neither too opulent or overdone in any way. They're not trying to impress anybody. It says a lot about him and about Barbara Bush. You know, it's a place for family and friends to be together. And that's the attraction of it. And that's what you feel when you're there.
You can see by his body action and his words how important Kennebunkport, Maine is to him. It's important to us. It's important to the entire network of Bush family now because of the importance in him.
The joys he gets of watching his grandchildren blossom into adults and to see the success of his family, I think far exceeds any success that he's had in his life, which in my mind far exceeds anything that anybody else in our family's ever done.
My husband is great. We're married 65 years, and there's no dark side, truthfully. Sometimes he makes me sort of mad, but I've never been ashamed or embarrassed about him, and I've always been proud of him.
George Herbert Walker Bush met Barbara Pierce at a high school dance in 1941, just a few weeks after the December 7th attack on Pearl Harbor.
And George asked someone there, do you know the girl in the red and green dress?
Beautiful girl in the red.
Oh, no, he didn't say that. And he said, yeah, I grew up with her. So George said, go cut in on her. In those days, we did that. And then you can bring her over and introduce me to her, which she did do. They played a waltz. And Waltzing Matilda here didn't waltz. He said, do you mind if we sit down for a minute? And we did and talked. Then I went to the Andover dance with him. And his first person who ever kissed me in front of about 15 people who didn't seem to notice, but I almost fainted from excitement. 16 and 17, 18. You were 17 then.
17, you were 16.
18 the next day, he was. That's like a song. You were 16.
I don't think they're interested.
To teenagers in love with wars in Europe and the Pacific, the future did not look bright. Bush joined his fellow Americans and enlisted as soon as he turned 18. He earned his wings and became the youngest pilot in the Navy at the time.
We wouldn't hear from you forever. And his mother and father were wonderful, and I had a brother who was overseas. I had a brother-in-law who was overseas. But it was different times.
Lieutenant Junior Grade Bush flew an Avenger torpedo bomber off carriers. The targets of his 58 bombing missions were Japanese installations on small islands in the Pacific. Bush's wartime diary includes descriptions of his close calls and the bombing run on Chichigima. Hit by Japanese flak, Bush completed the mission, then headed to sea. He was able to bail out, but his crew, the tail gunner and radio man, did not survive.
When he was shot down, I got a notice saying they had seen him rowing away and they thought a submarine and picked him up. And then his mom called me about a day later saying, he's fine, he's in Hawaii. He could have come home then, but he chose to stay. He's a hugely patriotic American.
Bush arrived home on Christmas Eve, 1944. 2 weeks later, friends and family attended George and Barbara's wedding.
It was a very sort of funny day, I think. But we had a luncheon, And my honest husband stood up and just wowed them all because he said something nice about, and you know, Barbara means beautiful, blah, 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 and on and on. When you look it up, it means Barbara means barbaric, strange, but he just lied. That was the only lie I know he's ever made. It was beautiful, the wedding.
Not long after their wedding day, the new bride's father wrote a letter predicting the young couple's future.
George was at Yale, and he said, I think he's the big man on campus. But he said, you know, someday he could be president of the United States. He really thought George was wonderful. We didn't expect that then. We did not think he was going to be president then. But he worked hard all his life and did everything the best he could, I believe. Best son, best father, best student, always. Must have been
Athlete.
hard. Sort of best athlete. Get the pictures for you in a minute.
Barbara Bush credits the Bush family matriarch for much of her husband's success.
Dorothy Walker Bush, well, first of all, she was the most extraordinary woman, truthfully. She was a great golfer, great tennis player, great paddle tennis player, and very nice. Put on less airs than anyone I knew. She really taught him all the things that you learn in kindergarten. Be honest, don't push. Talk about the other fellow, don't talk about yourself. And maybe she made George a fault that he shouldn't have had. Because Hugh Sidey told me one day, I think George Bush was the greatest president I knew, and I knew a lot, but he had one fault. He never took credit.
George H.W. Bush's personal modesty has not kept his family and his wife from telling in a way he never would how he influenced them, America, indeed the world. More of a Bush family album in a moment.
I come back.
My greatest inheritance, besides love from my father, was the fact that my dad moved from New England to Texas.
President George W. Bush, the eldest of George and Barbara Bush's 5 children.
He could have stayed up east, gone into Wall Street, settled into a very comfortable life, but instead he packed up Mother and me and moved out to Odessa, Texas. And I always have admired him for his pioneering spirit.
Moving to Odessa, Texas? Well, I'd never been here before. You know, it was dusty, but people were wonderful.
George Bush went to Texas to build a career on his own instead of following in his father's footsteps.
He told me that he really didn't want to work with something you couldn't touch, like banking or something that his family had done and maybe others too. And he was offered jobs by a lot of groups. Who was it turned you down? Procter & Gamble.
Oh, they make a fine soap and they turn...
They do make a fine soap, but George applied, or didn't even apply, they just turned him down. But he wanted to go. He'd been to Corpus Christi, I think, being trained. And I think he really loved that feeling of doing something different.
Oh, gosh, when I think back to Midland, Texas, I think of baseball. My dad was a very good baseball player. He was the captain of a successful Yale baseball team. They went to the NCAA championship twice, sadly lost both times. And he was a good first baseman, and I used to love to play catch with him. And I remember the first time he said, "Son, I can throw it as hard as I want," which meant a lot to me because it meant I'd come of age, at least in terms of being able to catch a baseball.
And the Bush family began to grow, first with a daughter, Robin, then another son, Jeb. Bush learned the oil business and founded the Zapata Petroleum Corporation with a group of investors in 1953. It became an offshore drilling operation with rigs around the world.
We had some very difficult times. When the rig went down, and that was, what, a third of your company's holdings, and that's tough. But you have to have someone who knows what it means to have 60 people, or whatever number they have, depending on your livelihood. I think that's important.
The difficult times the Bushes faced in the oil business were nothing compared to a parent's worst nightmare, when 3-year-old Robin was diagnosed with leukemia and died a year later. The lessons George Bush learned in building a business, creating jobs, and meeting a payroll became key to his next career.
When he came and told me he was going to run for county chairman, he didn't quite tell me that there were 300 and some precincts or 200 and some precincts, and he was campaigning I thought they'd all fall down and say, yes, perfect. How could? All our friends thought it was nutty. But George rolled up his sleeves and did it, and you loved it.
Politics became the family business. And with the same eagerness and drive he used to build his company, George H.W. Bush worked his way to the top.
Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Dad had handled his relationship with President Reagan extremely well. He remained loyal to the man who'd picked him to be vice president right up until the right moment, which was the convention. And when the curtain rose, he gave one of the great convention speeches ever. And that then helped define who he was.
I will keep America moving forward, always forward, for a better America, for an endless, enduring dream and 1,000 points of light. This is my mission, and I will complete it.
My dad is an informal guy. He can relax, and he sure loved his dog, Ranger. And I love the picture of Ranger relaxed on the rug in the Oval Office. The picture to me speaks about the importance of the job, the amount of work that a president has to do in order to do the job that people expect. Having Ranger around added some comfort to him.
George H.W. Bush's presidency faced challenges and opportunities on both the international and domestic fronts. The liberation of Kuwait and putting down Saddam Hussein in the Gulf War gave Bush one of the highest approval ratings ever for any president. But his numbers fell sharply during the 1992 presidential campaign.
I think it was the worst year of my life, watching George Bush get defeated for president.
I just called Governor Clinton over in Little Rock and offered my congratulations. He did run a strong campaign.
What was interesting about the moment, Mother's attitude was, it's over, get on with your life. That's exactly what we did, with his help and his encouragement.
George called everyone to come into the East Room, the staff. It was very, very crowded, and the wonderful Marine announces, ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States, and in walks, and he was funny.
I was staying in the Lincoln bedroom last night, and I couldn't resist getting on the phone, and I called up the Secret Service as the president. Feel like going jogging tonight? In the nude.
I remember a lot of things. Wouldn't be prudent. Not gonna do it.
They always use these silly gestures, which I don't use.
Oh, yeah.
You're not gonna do it. Wouldn't be prudent. That kind of thing.
And George, you were very good. He insisted everybody in the White House worked to the last moment, and that they helped the Clinton people as best they could, and I think they did. And then his mother, precious mother, died the day that the Clintons came to see the White House.
The loss of the presidency for George Bush held an unusual twist of fate.
Well, I thought about it a lot, and it just broke my heart. But he said, I realized that with the press against you, and you don't have the House or the Senate, George never had them, that you would have had the worst 4 years of your life. And not me, just the family. And it took a little while for me to buy that, but I think that's true.
And maybe George wouldn't have been elected president.
He wouldn't have. He wouldn't have been governor. So maybe that's okay.
It would have been very difficult for me to have run in 1994, and difficult for Jeb to have run in 1994. And so his pain really made it, the pain of loss, made it possible for us to run for public service, which I have found to be one of the great ironies of my life.
For only the second time in American history, a father and son each had served as president. John Adams was our second president, and son John Quincy Adams, number 6. George Bush, 43, remembers his first day in office and a surprise visit from 41.
And I was sitting at the desk just reflecting and kind of absorbing the environment. In walks my dad, and from my perspective, it was an unbelievably touching moment that he would come and share the early moments of my presidency with me.
President George W. Bush and President George H.W. Bush may share a great deal, but the father did not have a vision or plan for his son.
He didn't have some vision about what I should do in life. He didn't say, look, you need to go out and practice fielding for 10 hours a day because I want you to be a great shortstop. His attitude was, I'll provide some examples for you of how to live your life. I will set some certain values and go get it. I wish you all the very best. Obviously, if we needed help or advice, he was there. But he never really tried to steer the course of our life, for which I am eternally grateful.
And there's at least one thing that sets the two presidents apart.
I think it's fabulous, but not to the point where I want to emulate him.
Oh, that was fun up there,
yeah. Great fun.
When he was a kid and had to jump out after getting shot down, he hit his head and couldn't remember the moment, so he wanted to relive what it was like to jump out of an airplane. Since then, he is serving as an example to older citizens that, you know, you can live life to the fullest, and I think it's really cool.
Throughout his life, President George H.W. Bush set examples for others to follow, including me. I followed Bush 41 out the side of an airplane at the celebration of his 80th birthday. It was very cool, indeed very cold at 13,000 feet. We'll be right back.
Our dad is probably the sweetest person you'd ever meet. He's very thoughtful and kind and good and old-fashioned in that way. He just makes you feel like a very special person when you're with him. He has that ability. For example, when I call him on the phone, he always has the most enthusiastic, "Doro, is that you?" And he's just pretty special.
He was the only dad could catch a baseball, 10 straight times behind his back. He was just a cool dad. He's like a good wine. He's aged. He's gotten better with age. He's just possible. He is a cool guy.
Dorothy Bush Koch and Marvin Bush are the youngest of the family. As they were growing up, their father left the oil business to enter politics.
When you're 10 years old and you see your father on a billboard, it's kind of a novel. For us, it was novel. It was neat. My dad lost his first election. Big deal. Everybody expected him to lose. Then he ran for Congress and was, one of only 24 congressmen at that point in Texas who was a Republican, the only Republican. So that was a pretty big deal. And then, as your profile rises in politics, there's more scrutiny. And for those of us who obviously care about my dad, it gets tougher and tougher.
But with his family's support, and despite many political battles, Bush never shied away from seeking public office.
We'd lived in Washington a lot. He was a congressman when George was head of the CIA, head of the Republican Party. He was a lot of things. He's a man who can't say no.
After the thankless job of heading the Republican National Committee during Watergate and the Nixon resignation, President Gerald Ford offered Bush a choice of enviable posts.
When he told us, guess where we're going? They guessed, 400 countries when they got to China. I think it was the best thing that happened to us. Wan Ying. Oh, let's see. What's today? Oh, yeah. I was thinking about the weather. I learned at the State Departments. And I would talk to myself. And when I got over there, not one thing that I had learned was appropriate. But Dua Xiaqian, how much does it cost? Every American knew that. I loved it. And the food was divine.
We did take a really fun trip to China. We were there for over a month or a couple months, and we traveled. My mom became an expert on a lot of the tourist sites in China, but especially the Forbidden City. It was a pretty exciting time.
And there were further interesting and challenging times ahead for the Bush children.
When Dad became president, it was a huge thrill. It wasn't a surprise, really. It's not as if he wasn't qualified to be president. I don't know, it kind of fit with who he was. But for us, our dad was just the same.
I will say it wasn't all that much fun all the time, though, because the intensity is just ratcheted up. All of us just are so protective of our dad. There's perception and there's reality. There was a Newsweek article when he was running for president that had on the cover it said the wimp factor, and I thought to myself, that's kind of odd. Here's a guy who served his country as a young pilot. There was probably an expectation that this Ivy League guy would go to Wall Street, but he went to West Texas and built a business. Here's a guy who's a true family guy. It's not, which is rare in Washington. Here's a guy who literally watched his daughter die, which takes a lot of courage to keep a family together after that. Here's a guy who, just by virtue of the way he's lived his life, has proven that he's anything but a wimp. And so you have this perception, and then you have reality. And there are a couple of ways that you can handle that. You can retreat, or you can do what Doro and I did a lot, which was spend more time with him.
My dad is famous for letter writing, and so that gives you a glimpse of who he is.
George Bush expressed his gratitude to others through a continual stream of personal letters and notes. They were edited and collected into a book by his longtime assistant, Gene Becker. Bush described the book as, quote, letters written when my heart was heavy or full of joy, serious letters, nutty letters, caring and rejoicing letters.
So he just had no interest in looking back at his life. I mean, he sits in his office and thinks of ideas of fun plans and things to do in the future, and who can he call?
Daughter Doro is the author of My Father, My President, the memoir her father was too modest to write. In 2006, the USS George H.W. Bush was christened. It seems fitting to our 41st president and a way to honor a life of service to his country. Doro was designated as the ship's sponsor and got to wield the champagne bottle.
The world's best sponsor. She really is. She's unbelievable. She's put a library in. She did put in tapes for the mums and dads to read a child's book and then send the tape home so they can hear the voice. That's nice. She's been a great sponsor.
On June 10th, 2012, the Bush family welcomed the ship to the Maine coast. They spent time with the crew and took part in a re-enlistment ceremony for 60 sailors.
They sent me a picture of the new carrier, CVN 77, listing. Oh, it's beautiful, beautiful sea. That's one part of the Navy. I love being at sea. It's just heaven.
Are you ready?
Yes, sir.
Hold on.
For a guy who is sort of lives, life straight down the middle, he is very aggressive in his boat. I'm not going to say reckless, because he's not reckless, but because he's good at driving the boat. But for an 85-year-old dude to go, 50 miles per hour over 3 to 4 feet waves, it's pretty aggressive.
Whenever he had the chance, George Bush shared his love of the ocean, fishing, and fast boats with friends and visitors.
Dad was anxious to give President Putin at the time a ride in his boat. So Vladimir's an outdoor man, he's an adventurer, and so we get into his boat, and of course, after a slow start, he cranks that baby up, and it was interesting to watch Vladimir's reaction to the octogenarian former president blasting across the Atlantic. Fortunately, diplomatic relations weren't severed at that moment.
One thing you'll learn from spending time with folks who know and love my father is that, he's got literally 200 people who think that they're among his 5 best friends. We always joke in our family about having the 5th Beatle, meaning there are 4 boys and then there's another dude out there somewhere.
And we call those 5th Beatles types a brother from another mother. Because there's tons of them.
Coming up, he was a political rival, but also a great admirer of President George H.W. Bush.
They refer to me as their black sheep son. I'm the one that strayed from the fold.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to A Bush Family Album. Coming up, Jeb Bush, Neil Bush, and the self-described black sheep of the Bush family, former President Bill Clinton, tell us what they thought about President George H.W. Bush and why.
My dad is the most complete man I know.
Governor John Ellis Jeb Bush.
It's hard to describe it as a son, but he is courageous, he's honest, he has unimpeachable integrity. All the traits that you would describe as someone who's nearing perfection, he has. He's not perfect, no one is, but amazingly, he's as close as you can get.
But the trait Jeb, the second son, admired most in his father is what he sees as his courage.
My dad, I think, exhibited that in his entire life, starting as the youngest Navy pilot in World War II, moving to Midland in his business. So that took courage to get out of one's comfort zone, to take the risk of running for office in the minority party back in the early days of the Republican Party in Texas. And then certainly as president, he showed a toughness and a fortitude that people didn't think he had. He wasn't a politician when we were growing up. Remember, he got involved in politics when he was 40. He was a business guy. He traveled a lot. He wasn't always at home because he was working really hard. But when he was with us, it was always fun. We always did things. We always were going to a baseball game or going to play tennis or just outdoors playing catch. He was a fantastic father. He wasn't a strict disciplinarian, but when we messed up, his words of simply saying, I'm disappointed in you, was devastating. It was like 1,000 lashes and 1 month stuck in your room. So his means of child rearing were basically to set an example.
Being an example and setting standards for his children was George Bush's role. Barbara Bush dealt with the day-to-day business of raising the family.
I'm considered the meanest person in the world, and
The meanest?
well, toughest. Every one of the boys who give a speech can't wait to needle their mother. I mean, like George W. in Florida called me once, and Jebby are in the car, governor and president, and he says, "Mom, don't watch the news tonight." And I hear this roaring with laughter. And so, of course, I say, "What's the matter?" Jeb finally gets it out. He said, "Well, today a little girl asked, or young girl asked the president, is it important to eat as a family?" And he said, "Yes." And she said, "Did you eat as a family?" And he said,
I did eat with my family so long as my mother wasn't cooking. Just kidding, Mom.
That's just an average Bush joke. Right? Right.
In the '88 campaign, I worked full-time, so it was also kind of personally for me incredibly gratifying to see the victory when people forget this, but he was down like 15 points in the polls with 2 months to go. So it shows the extraordinary tenacity and determination of my dad that I think inspired everybody else to work a little bit harder. If you look at those 4 years, they were packed with really incredible events that could have gone in a completely different direction but for my dad's leadership. He has courage to act on his convictions.
The world has said this aggression would not stand, and it will not stand.
There's a tough inner strength that came out when he was president, when the world was focused on Operation Desert Storm. The public impression is that my dad is this nice guy, and nice guys can't be tough. That's probably the biggest fallacy. You can be tough and be kind. In fact, being tough in a bravado sense is really not toughness. You know, you don't want a president that's always focused on themselves. You want presidents that act on principle and then carry it out, and he did.
As president, I can report to the nation, aggression is defeated, the war is over.
The legacy word is something that he'll get nauseous when he hears it. But I think more than the accomplishments as president or as a public figure, the fact that my dad has literally thousands of friends. He has people that will be undyingly loyal to him. That's an extraordinary legacy if you think about it. Not many people can have earned that.
More of a Bush family album straight ahead.
Oh boy, what do I know that the rest of the world doesn't know? I mean, that's a tough question. I mean, everybody knows he hates broccoli, so that doesn't count.
Neil Bush, the third-born Bush boy, is today the head of the Points of Lights Institute. It was started during his father's presidency to promote volunteerism.
Well, it's hard to talk about my father without talking about his commitment to service. He has an enduring belief in the human quality of giving to others, and he models that for people in his own life. He's the most unselfish human being I think you'll probably ever meet. It's amazing how he lifts people, not only by his example, but by his actions. He's a very remarkable man. Basically, all my teenage life and on, he's been in political service. But, I mean, it was very normal And everyone thinks, you know, we ride around in limos or fly in private airplanes or eat in the best restaurants. I mean, we really have a very normal life. You know, Dad was out there cooking the hamburgers when we were young kids, so I think he's just a pretty average kind of family, but with exceptional parenting. I've always thought so highly of my dad that it didn't surprise me when he became president. In fact, I worked really hard to help him get to be president. We all did.
While many children of presidents enjoy perks that go along with living in the White House, that was not an option for the Bush children.
Mom, in fact, announced in Barbara Bush fashion, and Dad, of course, supported her, that if he were ever elected president, that the kids wouldn't be allowed to move into the White House. You know, we're independent adults. We have our own family lives, and so they stuck to that. I think when historians do look back at my father's presidency, they're going to see a remarkable pattern of success in everything he did, on the domestic side and on the foreign policy side. The tearing down of the Berlin Wall, you know, he dealt with the Tiananmen crisis in China with an amazing adroitness and diplomatic savvy. Obviously, when Saddam Hussein attacked Kuwait, my father rallied the forces of good and put together an amazing coalition and dealt with that aggression in just exactly the right way. Gave Saddam Hussein every chance in the world to right his wrong. And then when he stopped at the border, it was the right thing to do. On the domestic side, you know, there was issues related to the economy and taxation, and he worked a compromise with Congress, which turned out to be his downfall because he had made the very famous kind of in politics statement.
Read my lips.
Well, he did what was right at the time, and economists, in reflecting on his actions, support what he did to keep the economy going. He signed into law the legislation for the Disabilities Act. He signed into law the first volunteer service-oriented act for the United States. He had some legacy actions, domestic and foreign, that'll put him at the very high ranks. I'm a little biased, obviously, but at the very highest of ranks of our presidents. I think one of the most important legacies from my own personal selfish perspective is his commitment to volunteerism and to encouraging others to try to pitch in and do what they can to make the world a better place.
On July 16, 2013, President George Bush was invited to the White House for a presentation. For the 5,000th time, the Points of Light Institute presented their daily award to honor a volunteer organization. President Obama took this opportunity to thank the Institute's founder.
We are surely a kinder and gentler nation because of you, and we can't thank you enough.
Just like a rock, he just has a steady civility and kindness and givingness and lovingness, and he's never wavered one iota from that.
Coming up, the Bush brother from another mother, President Bill Clinton. His admiration for Bush 41 is striking. It's next.
I always liked him. You know, I liked him because after he had a very tough fight with President Reagan, when he finished second and he was asked to be vice president, he did.
Though they were once strong political opponents, it turns out former President Bill Clinton was always one of George H.W. Bush's admirers.
The first time I met him, I believe, was in the summer of 1983. The Governors Association met up in Maine, and he hosted them at his house in Kennebunkport. So we all went there. And I had my daughter, who was then 3 years old, and I walked up to the vice president, and I said, Mr. Vice President, I'd like you to meet my daughter, Chelsea. And I said, Chelsea, this man is the Vice President of the United States. And he reached over and shook her hand, and she looked at him and said, where's the bathroom?
From the start, Clinton was impressed by Bush.
And he took her by the hand and took her to the bathroom and introduced my daughter to his mother, who was then still living, and made a big impression on me. It's the kind of man he is. He's kind, and he treats everybody with genuine respect, and he's interested in people that are different from him.
While the two men did not agree on many issues, President Clinton was struck by Bush's integrity.
I liked him because he wasn't an ideologue. That is, he was a conservative, but he was open to argument. I think ideologues on the right or the left get this country in a lot of trouble. He voted for the open housing bill in 1968 in Congress to integrate housing in America. I thought that showed that he had the character to be open to the facts. And I liked him because I thought he was a very good man. And I think that he will go down in history for the positive things that he did to improve the security of the United States. In his term, the Berlin Wall fell, which was in part a reflection of the failure of communism and in part a reflection of the success of every American president from Harry Truman through George Bush, of just standing up for freedom.
In 2000, Clinton invited the Bushes to the White House for a notable occasion.
We celebrated the 200th anniversary of the White House in 2000, and I invited all the living presidents and former first ladies there. It was an amazing night of American history, but it was after the 2000 election and before the Supreme Court had awarded the election to President Bush, his son. So there they were, sitting in the White House. They had to be calm, they had to try to enjoy this, they had to realize the weight of the moment, and yet they had no idea whether their son was going to be president or not. They handled it. They were amazing.
Former presidents gather for events on rare occasions, but Bush and Clinton have been found together time and again. In 2004, on the day after Christmas, an earthquake shook and then a tsunami hit the coast of Southeast Asia. It was an unprecedented natural disaster. More than 200,000 people were dead or missing. Many areas were destroyed. The two presidents, Bill Clinton and George Bush, showed Americans that we are sometimes more united than divided. This unlikely team raised over $1 billion in relief funds.
One of the countries that was hardest hit, the Maldives, most people didn't know where it was. A lot of people didn't know anything about Sri Lanka. They didn't understand which part of India was hurt, what happened in Thailand. And we really sort of rekindled our bond that existed before the election in '92 in a way that just wasn't possible in the years when I was president. And I loved it. We had a great time together, and I think we did a lot of good.
The unusual partnership was tapped again the next year after Hurricane Katrina devastated the Gulf Coast.
It made people feel good to see not only a Republican and a Democrat, but two people who had run against each other working together. It caused people to relax because they realized that you could agree and disagree. We still don't agree on everything. They refer to me as their black sheep son. You know, I'm the one that strayed from the fold. But that's really the way America should work before people get out of politics. You know, I like him. I think we just have to keep struggling to find common ground in this country. And I can tell you on his part, it was genuine. He cared about the work we did together. He enjoyed the time we spent together. He believes that people who've had the opportunities we've had in life should serve as long as they live and are able. And I want people to know that about him. He is a good man.
President Clinton believes George Bush should be remembered and admired simply for the way he lived his life.
If every American could have seen him driving that speedboat, not only with daring but with skill, he became the same man who was the youngest fighter pilot shot out of the air in World War II when he was only 18. Because he just get that almost boyish excitement and fire in his eyes, and you could see that's really the secret to every man and woman's life. You know, you have to have something to look forward to, and you have to find joy in the moment, and he does. And the idea that he's still jumping out of airplanes every 5 years to mark his birthday, I mean, it's astonishing. So that's what I'd like for people to remember about him. The guy's got a lot of juice. He loves life, and he's a genuinely good man.
Some people find it astonishing that these two political rivals became such good friends. Well, I've interviewed them both, and I know their relationship to be genuine. As President Bush has said, just because you disagree on something doesn't mean you can't work together. That's an attitude that once separated much of American politics from the rest of the world. and it is basic to the character of President George H.W. Bush. And now we close a Bush family album with these final words.
He was a professional, and he was a man with a great heart. He taught me that values matter, that principles should be inviolate.
He's loyal. As Darla said, he's kind, he's thoughtful, he's funny.
The example that he set for us is, it's no other greater gift we could have.
The final legacy is he's going to be, remembered as a president that just had a great love for people, and his ability to bring out the best in people.
History is more like an ocean rather than a stream, so you can't necessarily impact events. But over time, the cumulative effect of people looking at that period of time, I think my dad will be treated really, really well.